Hi, friends. I'm back with another interview. This time, I'm going to be speaking with illustrious writer and medical doctor Vincent Lam. Vincent Lam requires no introduction, but if you're not familiar with his work, he is the writer of a book called Bloodletting Miraculous Cures, which won the 2006 Scotiabank Giller Prize and was adapted for television and broadcast on HBO Canada. He's also done some nonfiction writing, but I've come to know his work through that very first book, Bloodletting Miraculous Cures. Earlier this year, he's released another book, On the Ravine, which features two characters that sort of showed up in his 2006 novel. And I'm speaking with him about his work in terms of being a writer and a physician, but also to highlight the fact that he's going to be in Toronto as well this weekend as part of this Toronto International Festival of Authors. The festival itself runs from September 21st to October 1st, but Vincent Lam will be on site from on Friday the 22nd and Saturday the 23rd. So he will be doing 3 events at TIFA this year, but I hope that you learn more about his work and enjoy our conversation coming up next. Good afternoon, friends. I am sitting virtually with, somebody I've admired for a while. You are a medical doctor and you're also a writer. Mr. Vincent Lam, thank you for joining me. I'm so happy to meet you.
Pleasure to be here.
So, I'm assuming a lot of people know of your work at this point. You're known for your writing in terms of the Scotiabank Giller Prize winner, Bloodletting and Miraculous Cures, that came out back in 2006, I believe. But you're still active in the medical field. Can you maybe just talk a little bit as an introduction? How do you navigate these two worlds now that it's been a number of years since you began your writing career as well?
It's a great question. I'm really privileged to be able to work as both a physician and as a practicing active writer. And it certainly does require some navigation. There are some really important similarities between both types of work in that both types of work are ultimately about stories.
Mm-hmm.
They're about human narrative. And so that through line runs through both of them. And yet, of course, they're different. In medicine, people bring me a real problem that they're having, and they want me to help them with their real problem.
Mm-hmm.
And fiction, of course, is totally different. Fiction is wide open. There are no problems until I invent the problem in the world of fiction. And then I have to solve that problem in fiction. Whereas in medicine, I'm trying to help people with a problem that they already have brought. One of the things that is very important in terms of navigation for me, because I sometimes do write about a fictional set of events and fictional characters that are set within medicine. For instance, in my recent novel, On the Ravine, the novel is deeply rooted in the opioid crisis. And the opioid crisis is an area that I know well as an addiction medicine doctor, which is the work I do now.
Mm-hmm.
So the navigation is really important in terms of boundaries. And one of the first things that's really, really important for me is to be absolutely sure that I'm writing fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So I often consciously make choices in terms of, say, characters and episodes and plot, which I know did not happen to me personally.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really, really important for me in terms of there being a healthy boundary. And then at the same time, there is this kind of interconnection. And often the interconnection is that when I'm going through the world, whether that's as a doctor or whether that's just as a guy living in the city of Toronto and living my life, often I kind of wonder, oh, what if something had happened differently? What if instead of this happening, it was that, or instead of someone saying this, they said that. And that kind of day-to-day imagining in my real life can often feed fiction. So that's a kind of interplay which happens and where the two worlds talk to each other, but the boundary between my real nonfiction life as a doctor and my
Mhm.
fiction remains preserved.
That's such a great answer. And, in a way, it seems like common sense, but it's also something that sounds like requires effort, as you say, in terms of maintaining these boundaries, but still being able to live your life day to day. So you mentioned your latest novel, On the Ravine, that just came out earlier this year, and you are revisiting two characters from your initial book from 2006, Dr. Chen and Fitzgerald. When did you realize that you wanted to expand on the story of these characters?
Well, actually, the book started first, and the characters worked their way into it later. And
Mm-hmm.
so, at the very beginning, when I was writing On the Ravine, it was about opioids. The emphasis was actually quite different than it is now, but neither Dr. Chen nor Fitzgerald were in the book at the very start. I worked on the book for 8 years, so they had plenty of time to figure out whether or not they wanted to be in the book.
Right.
And Dr. Chen arrived in the book relatively early in the process. I would say in the first couple of years, it felt like he was going to be in the book again. And Dr. Fitzgerald came into On the Ravine quite late, came into the book, I'm going to say, beyond halfway through the process. So maybe it was year 5 or so.
Mhm.
And really there had been a number of other characters who were doing different things. And I often amalgamate things, change things, move them around, discard them completely. It's very chaotic, actually. And a number of the things that were core that I wanted to keep, I realized they could be expressed through Dr. Fitzgerald and
Mhm.
come back in this book. And so there you go. So Dr. Chen and Dr. Fitzgerald from Bloodletting and Miraculous Cures ended up in On the Ravine.
So interesting, right? How, certain characters will sort of, like you said, make themselves known to you when they want to be part of a new project. Um, you mentioned the book was always going to be about the opiate crisis, and you now work in that field professionally as an addictions treatment specialist. What is it about um, being able to write about this very real and very poignant topic in a fictional way that sort of allows us to maybe come at it from a different sense of understanding?
One of the things that has really always allowed addiction to resonate for me as an issue and as a field is that ultimately so much of what happens in addiction is just absolutely fundamentally and deeply human.
Mm-hmm.
Because ultimately, so much of addiction is discovering that there's a way to feel the way one wants to feel
Mm-hmm.
and then wanting to do that again. And
Mm-hmm.
we've all had that experience, whether we discover a delicious food that we simply love and want to have again, or whether it's we meet someone who is incredibly resonant and incredibly luminous to us when we meet them. And then, of course, we want to see them again. And if we're fortunate, we're able to. So these forces are fundamental. And then the other really fundamental force is the desire to feel that things are going to be okay, to feel that whatever it is that is troubling me, I'm going to be able to work it out and I'm going to be able to get through it and it's going to be okay. And it turns out that substances can provide all of these experiences. They can provide a really pleasurable encounter. They can provide something that we want to get back to. They can provide a sense of well-being. And so these are just very, very deeply human forces. And they're the kinds of forces which move real life people like myself, like the people whom I take care of. They're the kinds of forces which move characters in books. And so to me, it seems very, very natural um, to want to understand these issues and to want to write about these issues because these are issues that I'm concerned about as a human being. You were asking about the importance of writing about it in fiction.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that is really, really important. And so I've also written nonfiction,
Right.
treatment of opioid use disorder. I'm one of the editors of a textbook on the treatment of opioid use disorder. And I can tell you, when I'm writing a textbook, I'm not writing the same way
Right.
because I'm things that are deeply based in science, that are about treatment protocols and criteria and dosages, and it's very different. But it doesn't mean that that contains the whole truth,
Right.
because there is a huge dimension which is human and which is nuanced. And the best place for us to explore human nuance is through fiction, because we can enter into the fictional worlds and minds and visions and feelings of another human being. And I think this is actually a very, very deep and important type of understanding that can come from that fictional engagement. And so that's really what I wanted to do in On the Ravine. I wanted to be able to explore some of the nuances of the human experience, both for people who experience a substance use disorder, such as opiate use disorder,
Mhm.
and people who are trying to care for and help people who are experiencing these issues.
Yeah, I'm so in agreement with you there in the sense that I think I mentioned offline how I've also worked in that field for a few years as well, and there is that underlying human aspect of this story that often gets lost when we talk about treatment, and or people might not necessarily always understand the reason why somebody ends up in this situation as well, in terms of depending on a substance like an opioid. um, I understand that the character of Dr. Chen is somebody who's very much about doing what it takes to help their patient. You know, and I think that is indicative of a lot of doctors who work in this field. Um, I know that people will probably assume that it's part of your alter ego now, that Dr. Chen is someone that maybe is loosely based on yourself. But do you also have other people that have influenced you in creating these characters that kind of stay with us?
Well, it is true that many people sort of infer that there's some kind of meta representation of myself in the fictional world. And to that, I would say that there isn't any more than there is for any fictional character which any writer writes. If I were to write a cowboy novel, I have absolutely no doubt that some of the personality characteristics and some of the interests and some of the obsessions of all of the characters in that novel would in fact be true to me. And
Mhm.
so in that sense, I think that's always true of fiction. And that's certainly true of my relationship to my characters. Um, One of the really great things that we can do as writers is we can explore these passionate corners of ourselves, which maybe for very good reasons we choose not to explore in our real lives. For instance, one of the characters whom readers will meet in On the Ravine is a medical student. And it's a medical student whom Dr. Chen feels very strongly about, very fondly towards, and who is no longer in his life. And I can assure you that there is no such former or present medical student who fits that description in my life.
Mhm.
But like Dr. Chen, I think about the past.
Right.
And like Dr. Chen, things that have happened in the past, disappointments, regrets, losses, those inform my present. And Dr. Chen's sense of what could have been, his longing for possibilities which did not come to fruition in the past, inform his present very deeply. And that's a human experience. And I understand that tension between past disappointment, past longings, and present desires, present choices, present obsessions.
Mhm.
I understand that, and that is really, really powerful territory for me to explore. And it so happens that Dr. Chen actually has a much more interesting life than I do. Mine is comparatively dull. People who know me in real life would.
I can understand that. There's a level of separation between characters and writers. I was thinking, as you mentioned, how the past informs the present. Did you see in kind of tying it back with our initial question, did you see that there was going to be this balance that you've achieved now in terms of pursuing these two sort of careers, if you will, in terms of, in hindsight now, looking back at the success you've had so far, and also still continue to be able to help people through your medical practice?
Well, I've had different relationships with the notion of that balance.
Hmm.
And if I think about this concept of kind of a balance between my medical and my writing career, I think there was a very naive early stage, which is actually when I was a teenager. So when I was a teenager, this is what I envisioned for myself. This is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a physician and I wanted to be a fiction writer. And I think everyone around just thought that was silly. And yeah, you'll get over that once you grow up. But that was my idea when I was a teenager, and I think I had this really naive idea that I would just kind of divide out the time and spend some time doing this. That would be easy. So it turns out it's more complicated than that. Medicine's a really big deal, and I was fortunate because I really fell in love with medicine for the sake of doing medicine, and didn't write for a long time while I was training, and then I began to write when I was early in my career as a practicing physician. Well, I began to write again. I had written when I was a teenager, and there's just been so many times. There's been times where I felt like I need to be tilting more into writing than I'm currently doing. There have been times where I have felt like writing is really taking over everything and crowding out some of the medicine that I've wanted to be doing. There have been times where I think I had really unrealistic expectations of myself in terms of things like the speed of writing and things like that. And I think people who are not physicians, who are writers, go through a lot of these challenges as well. And there have been times when things have felt like they're relatively balanced. So it's a bit of a seesaw. I really do think that the other thing I've discovered is that medicine and writing are truly basically part-time jobs, because I'm also a parent, and the parent of 3 wonderful children, and that is really job number 1.
Exactly.
Medicine and writing are a notch behind that. So I continue to seek balance. I continue to try to figure out that tension. But one thing that has really come up again and again is just my sense of being so grateful that I have the opportunity to do not one but 2 types of work that I love, and that has truly been a blessing.
Absolutely. And, there's room for Vincent Lam, the person, as you said, and the priorities that come with being yourself and a parent and a partner. Thank you for that. That was really thoughtful. I was thinking in terms of how you sort of manage, how you do self-care as well, because you navigate a career that is, in terms of working with patients regularly, that can also be quite demanding. Do you do any writing that is just specifically for yourself as part of that process of taking care of yourself? What are some of the things that kind of get you through some of the challenges of navigating the world of addiction treatment?
Sure. Well, it's absolutely true that working in addiction is really a very demanding field, and it can be exhausting. Sometimes at the end of a day in clinic, I'm just completely physically and emotionally spent. And I think that's the experience of many of my colleagues as well. So the the question of how to care for the self is a tremendously important question. I think that one of the things that I've really learned after being in medical practice for a number of years is a sense of the normality that things can be tough and things can sometimes feel really tough.
Mhm.
And really deliberately acknowledging that and making room for those feelings to be there. I think sometimes when we're really early in our training, or just if we perhaps aren't even training yet in a helping profession, but we just imagine it and idealize it, we think, okay, I'm going to do this perfectly. I'm going to be the best at it. And actually, medicine really kind of selects for people who think like that. All kinds of, systemic reasons. It
Mhm.
really does kind of select obsessive perfectionists. And I think there comes a point when we actually enter the space of working in a helping profession where we realize, wow, the world is really complex. The world is not ideal. The world is not like my textbook, right?
Right.
Things don't go the way I hope if if I read a textbook. And so then we have to make room for all the hard feelings, for frustration, for disappointment, for confusion,
Mhm.
sometimes for anger, sometimes for betrayal, right? There's a whole range of emotions that if we deny them, we're not being true to ourselves. If we make room for those and give them the room they need, then we are able to accept that experience and to learn from it. So that's a big part of what I do. Another really big part of what I do is I really try to reflect upon my role as a physician and what that means, why I'm doing it. And I'm doing it wanting to be a compassionate, science-based servant of the public. And I have to remember that. I have to really hold on to my values and hold on to the reasons that I'm doing medicine in order to both be effective, but also to be able to find meaning in the work so that I can continue to do the work.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, that's what happens in terms of my relationship with some of the hard things in work. And then if I think about the things that I do in my life more broadly, so much of it is the things that um, that we all know we should do, and I'm always working on doing more of, and they're not rocket science.
Right.
So I try my best to have a good routine in terms of daily habits, nutrition, good sleep. Physical exercise is really important to me. It's really important to me in terms of both the way I feel physically,
Right.
but also the way I feel mentally and the way I engage with myself. So I'm really pretty routine about that, and then it's about making time for people who matter, and it's about making time to be with family and
Mhm.
to be with people whom I care about a great deal. Most of my friends are people whom I've known for decades at this point, and they mean a lot to me. And it's really important to nourish those relationships. I think for everyone, and certainly to me, it's really important to
Mhm.
nourish those relationships. I'm very fortunate to have those kinds of relationships.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we get to a point in life where that we do realize what those core essentials are. And as you said, sometimes they're very logical, but we go through phases in life when things can kind of fluctuate in terms of prioritizing our own self-care. And I think when I hear you speak it out, it actually makes sense that when you write, we get this humanity in your characters because I'm sensing that you have this really great awareness of where you fit in as a physician, but also the human component that you mentioned that goes along with that. I mean, that's sort of part of the the role that you sort of chosen to take. So thank you for sharing that. I don't want to forget that, you are going to be in the city in the next few days, speaking about your book On the Ravine at the Toronto International Festival of Authors, but you also have a couple of other events at that festival. And, one of them that has well, there's two of them that I kind of want to highlight. There's the one that you're gonna do your reading on the book, and you're also gonna be doing two. One is the Diaspora Dialogues with another author, another Canadian author, Zalika Reed Benta, whose book Fry and Plantain is also quite interesting, and the Freedom to Read as well. Are these events that the organizers approached you to be a part of, or is this something? Are these themes that you're kind of wanting to address as well in when you do events like this one, for example?
Yes, the organizers approached me to take part in these events, and I think that they really take a thoughtful approach and try to match writers to particular events. So it's really with great pleasure that I look forward to participating in Diaspora Dialogues as well as Freedom to Read.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the books that you kind of gravitate to when you or like, for comfort, or for you have a special place in your bookshelf and your heart?
Well, I read quite eccentrically, and I have a rainbow of books that are important to me. I can think of some recent books. I mean, I always think of recent books.
Yes.
So I read a great book called Visitation, which is a book that follows the people who inhabit a particular property in East Germany. Both before it becomes East Germany, and then later when it becomes East Germany, and then into reunification, and that is a compact but absolutely powerful and amazing book. I've recently read a book called Ultra Processed People. It's a nonfiction book, and it's a book about processed food, and it's really fascinating because it sounds like a narrow topic, but the thesis is actually incredibly broad, because the thesis both has to do with ultra processed food at a molecular level, but the role of that food at a systemic level in terms of how it fits into our system and how it fits into our culture, and ultimately the ways in which it impacts our health. And so that's another recent read that I've found super powerful and super moving.
Yeah, they sound really interesting, and I had not heard about these two books, so I'm going to be adding them to my ever-growing list of books as well. For anyone who's curious, are you working on any other fiction or nonfiction books at this point? I know there's a process that takes a while to get things rolling, but what can we forward to next from you? More tours, maybe another book?
Well, I think it's sometimes said, and I'll preface it by saying I think writers sometimes say this when they're feeling a bit cranky.
Fair.
But there's actually a great deal of truth in it. That the only reason to write is that it would be worse not to write. Oh, boo-hoo. You can hear people saying, poor you, right? But I think the implication of that is that most writers, including myself, are always working on something, in the sense that there's something going on up here at any given moment, and things grow, things also gestate for a while. And things gestate until they can inhabit space that they need to inhabit. So I'm thinking about the next book. I may have started to take some notes. it won't be like any of the books that I've written previously.
Mhm.
And I have I think I'm trying to learn the lesson of not setting really firm timelines for myself. Because
Right.
I just end up being frustrated and
Mhm.
pointed, and I have hard feelings towards myself because the deadlines I set for myself, blah blah blah. So it'll come when it's ready to appear, but I cannot help but work on it.
Mhm. So we're going to be looking forward to that, and I understand you're going to be doing a few more events in the year. So for anyone who's interested, VincentLam.com, I believe, is your website.
VincentLam.ca.
CA. My apologies. Thank you for catching those. It's such a pleasure to speak with you. I've learned so much, and I'm looking forward to your events at TIFA. I'm sure they're going to be quite popular.
Great chatting with you.
Thank you again.
Okay, take care.